Good morning, and thank you for joining Resilient You. On our show, we have guests that come on and talk about topics of resilience. This week, we have Sarah Sexton Miller. Sarah is someone that I met, and I'm so impressed. Thank you, Sarah, for joining. Sarah is an author and a genealogist, and I'm so looking forward to talking with you. Sarah, thanks so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's talk. Let's talk. What do you want to tell our listeners?
So I am a veteran of the Navy, and I teach, which actually this year I'm an interventionist. So instead of having a regular classroom, I'm teaching children from several different classrooms and working with teachers and helping them. I've written a book and I've written an article, and I have an online monument at the Black Holocaust Museum online. And just the little things, but teaching pays the bills. And also, I really enjoyed genetic genealogy. And for years, I was like, I really wish law enforcement would use this. I really think it could work. And now they're solving all these crimes doing the same things that we've done in our living rooms for so long. And that's really cool.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So your book is really interesting to me. So you were telling me that is the story. The book is called Bad Boys of Butler County, and it is about a gang from the 1800s.
Yes, there were two men that are well remembered that everybody knows about around here locally, and that's Kelly and Hip, Charles Kelly and John Hip. So they call it the Kelly Hip Gang. And my maiden name was Kelly, so of course, being a genealogist, I looked into this, and I was no relation to Charles Kelly, or not that I know of, because Charles Kelly is sort of a mystery. But through researching my own family, I did find a connection, because my great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather, Herschel McKay, was actually in the gang too. There were actually a lot more members than we remember. We only remember Kelly and Hip because they were lynched. But there were other members of the gang who escaped and went on to live to be old men, and one of them was my ancestor.
Wow. So in that time frame, I imagine it was like gunfights and that kind of thing, and to find that
axe
they were
murders, yeah. There were several different incidences. There was the final straw was when they killed the tax collector, but before that there were or at least that's what got them eventually caught. But before that there was the murder of a merchant, and he was shot. And then there was the axe murders of an old couple who lived nearby. And one that I wasn't able to find in the newspapers, but that has been passed down, was there was an African-American woman who was killed as well. But I couldn't find that one in the newspapers, but I'm not surprised considering the times and everything. And there was a man who was found in a ditch. He had been weighted down, but when the water went down, they found him. So he had been missing for a while before they realized he had been murdered. And so, yeah, there were a lot of, there was a man who snitched, so to speak, because they would tie an old decrepit animal like an ox or a mule or whatever that was on its way out anyway. They would tie it to a railroad track, and when the train hit it, they would come after the train company for damages. And so they pulled this stunt with a big ox, and the train derailed. So the railroad company sent an investigator, and a man whose last name was Dunn, he told the investigator about my ancestor and his brother, and he had seen them tie the mule, And so this became an issue, and he was one of the men that was murdered. And the men in the gang, they ran what was called Blind Tigers at the time, which was like the name for a speakeasy, illegal drinking establishment. So they found him murdered outside of one of the Blind Tigers owned by my ancestors. So that was really one of the big murders that was written about extensively in the paper. And there were trials for years, and eventually they said, hey, we can't convict, we can't prosecute, we have no proof. And so after years of being on the run and then being in jail, waiting for trial, eventually they walked free.
Wow. Listening to this story, it's so intriguing, like, I know myself, I joined Ancestry.com a while back, and my family, I didn't know much about my family because my parents had been divorced, and I knew both sets of grandparents, and then but I didn't have much beyond that. So going in and researching, and of course hoping for the best, and I'm going back, further back, saying, okay, here's a French revolutionary, and here's a war hero or somebody. But it's like, well, I didn't know I have French in my, wait a minute. So I'm not even sure if what I have traced is correct, and so anyway, when I find, and then I found my biological father listed in a book from the Youngbloods of Indiana, and they were, well-known family there, and they wrote a book about their genealogy. So that's cool. So maybe they need to do a reprint and get my name in there. But
did you ever do a DNA test?
So I did the one where you spit and send it to them.
At Ancestry?
And, yes. So I don't know if it's correct.
Oh, it is.
So
and they just updated their ethnicities again, so you might want to log on and have a look. It might change a little bit.
So I grew up thinking I was Italian and Irish, and and a little German on my dad's side, and then on my mom's side, my grandmother said she was a mix of English and a few different things. But when I got my DNA results back, it was like 50% English, which is more than I thought. And I got this Roman nose here, so, but nobody else has it. So somebody else in my distant family, they were like, oh, well, maybe your dad's not your dad. Maybe there's another man who's your father. And I'm like, well, my mom was a lot of things, but not a liar. so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Even though one of your parents wasn't 100% English, they probably each were about half, and just, you got that much from each, and so you ended up with half. I actually had, through my research, discovered that one of my ancestors was a former slave, African American, and he had been what they called, quote from the documents, a very light mulatto. So meaning, he already had been, I hate to say watered down, but even then he wasn't completely black. And so his family actually moved south because this was from the 1700s, and then so they moved south after they were freed, because I think they bought their freedom, like they were able to work and earn money in addition to what they had to do as enslaved people. But they moved south, and most of their descendants married white people, and they were listed. It was funny because one record would have them as mulatto, and one record would have them as white, and one would have them as black, because some people, I guess, could see it and some couldn't. And within a couple of generations, I guess they didn't tell I think they didn't tell their kids what had happened, because they had grandchildren fighting for the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
but to get back to the point of what I was saying, my DNA test, I have just a little bitty bit that showed up in my test. So I was like, okay, so, because, you know, you do, like you said, you do all this and you find all these records and you know that you're right, but at the same time, when you find something that stands out like that, you wonder, well, is this right? You know, because it was so long ago. Is it possible that there were two men by this name? And so then you get the DNA test, and it's like, okay, all right then.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm going to have to, now that I have the DNA results, I'm going to have to go back to, because the other part is, like, when I was watching a movie about the Scandinavian people and the people on the ships, anyway, I'm drawn to that, yet I don't like boats. And I'm like, wow, maybe that's something from, my history. Like, what's up with that? But yeah, it's interesting. It's really a neat thing. I mean, some families, they know their history. They're very strong in it. They have their crest. They have their, everything. But I'm one that I don't. Having a dysfunctional family and a broken family and a broken childhood, I really have no knowledge of it. So I've always been searching. Like, I held on to my birth father's name for so long, hoping he would come back and come, but he never did. And then after he died, he died of cancer, and I never knew him because, again, he didn't support me growing up. And, coming from being abandoned like that, it really did damage to me that I never really wanted to face until later in life.
Yeah.
So that's.
I definitely get that. Yeah. My father died when I was very young. He was killed by a state trooper. So, I think that's part of the drive of why I'm so into genealogy. Like, my father died when I was so young, and then my mother's family was, I don't know, that was the family that raised us and that we were around the most. So I did want to know more about my father's family. I didn't know them, but we weren't close. I knew who my aunts and uncles were, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go over to their house and spend the night, and I really grew up feeling like they were better than us, if that makes sense. Like, we weren't at that caliber. And now I look back and I'm like, really? Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I have some favorites, but some of them I'm like, no, there's when you have like 14 kids, which is how many my grandmother had, like, you're bound to have a wide variety of attitudes and personalities and all of that. So yeah, that was the big family, and that was the family that I didn't really grow up as a part of. And then my mother was basically, she wasn't an only child, but sometimes it felt like it. She had a half brother, and he lived with my grandmother forever, and we were actually really close. He was my uncle, and when I think of my uncle, that's who I think of, that one uncle. I'm like, oh, I got one uncle, and then I think, no, wait, I've got a lot of uncles, But he was the one who was always there and, like, filling in that position of, the go-to guy. Like, if your pipes burst or whatever,
Oh, nice.
But yeah, like, that whole, I think like a lot of genealogy starts that way, with people who have something missing and they're trying to find it or whatever. So, like collecting ancestors.
Yeah, right. Oh, wow. So maybe now this is a good time to bridge into your upbringing. You told me that you grew up in a small community outside of town, and you were the second of 6 siblings and the oldest girl. Do you want to talk a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, so, well, like I was saying, my dad and my mom, they married very young. My mother was 15 and my father was 17 when they got married. Depending on whose story you listen to, there's little different stories about that. My grandmother, who I call my granny, my mother's mom, she said that, they wouldn't have it any other way. They just stayed on her until the parents signed. They had to get married. And then my mother's story was that she came home from school one day and they said, here, you're getting married. So, like the way she told it, it was like not what she wanted. And the way my grandmother told it, it was like that was all she wanted. So, one of those things where, I do tend to believe my granny's side, but I have no proof of any of it. I don't know. So they married, and they quickly had 3 kids. According to my mother, every time they had sex, she had a baby. But she told me that, so first they had my brother when she was 16, and then they had me when she was 17, and she told me that, I mean, it's crazy because she probably only told me this once, but it's just some things you never forget. But she told me that when she went to the doctor and he told her that, she was expecting again, she cried and she said, "Why me?" And he had to give her the birds and the bees at that time. She was pregnant with her second child and did not know what made babies, like why she was having more babies. So that's what she said. So basically, I was in an accident. But then she turned right around, and I have a younger brother. He just had a birthday, so, the way the birthdays work is like, for a little while, we're 2 years apart, and then for a little while, we're 1 year apart. So basically, we're 18 months apart, but depending on when we've had a birthday. Like, he just had one, so right now he's only a year behind me. So she had 3 kids, and my dad struggled with his mental health. I've been able to, like, piece together kind of what happened. It's one of those things that is kind of hush, because like nowadays, if someone gets killed by, law enforcement, it's a big story. Answers are demanded, but back then it was a shameful thing. It was something you didn't talk about. You didn't go around telling people that your family member was killed by law enforcement. So, but basically my father had already at one point gotten on a bus and gone to another state, Georgia, I think, in that case, and claimed amnesia. And he had been put into a hospital, and after a while, he remembered who he was, and he went home. Personally, I think if he was faking, he got tired of being in a hospital and wanted to go home, so he suddenly remembered. If he was faking, I don't know, but it feels like he might have been, because the incident where he got killed, he got on a bus and he went to Arkansas, and it was almost an identical story. He showed up at a preacher's house. He wanted to be a preacher, and he showed up at a preacher's house and was like, "I don't know who I am, and can you help me?" And he got really upset when the preacher wanted to call to get him some help, like medical help or whatever. And so he got up and left, and when the preacher called, law enforcement came, and he was in the dark. And, this is the part where I don't know what to believe, because, at the time you believe what you're told. You believe every word of what you're told. But then in light of all of the things that have happened since police started wearing body cameras, it's like, well, it gets murkier then. So, but especially since no one in my family ever knew of my father ever owning a gun, and we were very poor. So where he suddenly got one from, who knows, but, so he had like a little bag with him, and supposedly he went into the bag and aimed a gun, and then they shot him. But as a genealogist, doing research in the newspapers on what happened, the man who shot him, John West, he had trained on the gun. He was like a marksman. Like, he had been training on this rifle, and he had won awards before the articles about my father. He had won awards. There were articles about that. And then previous to that, he had also taken down someone else. So my father wasn't the first. So then when you know things like that, then you start to think, okay, nobody in my family knew of a gun. it was so far away from home. It's not like we could go and, really investigate. We just believed what we were told. But, so yeah, I don't know if he had a gun or not, but he had an obvious mental health crisis for sure. And so,
yeah. Now, were you able to talk to that preacher from Arkansas?
My husband and I were on a trip, and we actually drove through that town, and so we went and looked around. We found the church where he was killed, and the parsonage was no longer beside the church, so we were able to find out where that was, and we went and talked to the man who was the preacher at that time, and he's like, oh yeah, we heard about that, how years and years ago a man got killed out there and stuff. And he told us of an older couple that lived right beside the church. He said, now they are the only people I know of who were always members of the church who are still around, so you might can talk to them. So we went to their house and we knocked, and they probably were hard of hearing, but I didn't want to beat on someone's door, And we knocked and nobody ever came to the door. And I told my husband, I said, well, it's possible he called to tell them we were coming and they didn't want to see us. And I just think we should go. I wanted to talk to them, but then I didn't want to seem aggressive. And I guess that, kind of goes back to what happened to my father in that same place, I don't want to be seen as some crazy person out here being aggressive or something. So, we just knocked, and when they didn't come to the door, we left. So.
Oh, wow. Now, how did you feel being in that place? Did you have any?
It was like when you said that just now, it felt a little emotional, but at the time, I don't remember being overly emotional. I remember, I guess it just felt more trying to get to the bottom of something, trying to investigate something. And I didn't feel I don't think I felt super close to it, but I don't know. I mean, my husband might have a different memory of it. Because it was been several years back, so I don't remember being emotional at the time, but.
Now, how old were you when your dad died? You said he died young?
I was 3.
Oh,
yeah, because he was 22 when he died, I think.
Wow. Okay. Now, my mom was mentally ill, and her mom was mentally ill in a different way, and so it may have been generational. And oftentimes when you have mental illness, you have behaviors which are, eccentric or, pronounced, right? So the 1800s, the gangs and all that, behaviors and stuff, it could have just propagated
down. That was his great-grandfather.
Right? It could. This is true. There's facts. I, did a little research on it myself, but it's interesting. And I know that today our world is so different. We have the internet, we have immediate, anything we want, it's at our fingertips. And so, you can find out information, and in a way it's better, because you can grow and you can learn and you can connect with others, when you have, painful things and you haven't dealt with it, you can get hope. And so, and for my story, I know I wrote my memoir, which it's not out yet, but I'm working on it. But it's something that I really hope inspires others and, gives them hope. If they're struggling, going through something, either with relationships, with their families, and again, I feel when someone like you that comes on and, tells their story and their history and the family, it's going to help others greatly. Now, we talk about resiliency, right? So your parents were younger and maybe, not as emotionally mature as, somebody who married later in life. And that probably had an impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my grandmother didn't want my mother. She didn't want to have any more babies, and she didn't want to, she says that, well, why did I marry you? I should have married your brother. She would hit my grandfather. I didn't want to be with you, she would say. And,
yeah, my mother,
I never understood it growing up. I was like,
I was going to say, my mother didn't, according to her, she didn't feel wanted either because my grandmother's husband was shot. Her first husband was shot and died, supposedly cleaning his gun, or something like that. So, her first, which I didn't know this at the time growing up, they made it sound like he died while they were together, but I learned through genealogy that they had divorced before he died. But my grandmother had divorced, which we didn't know, and her first husband was shot, which my grandmother said he was shot by another woman's husband. But my newspaper research said he was cleaning his gun. So, who knows? But then she married. So, this is a funny story, too. So, my grandfather was 10 years younger than my grandmother. So, he was a kid when she was a young wife. And one day, and he was from a really, really bad family, too, which I'm going to write a book about them, too, because he was from Crenshaw County, and he was from the moonshine people, okay? But, and his father was a killer. Anyway, it's bad in this family. It's really bad. But, anyway, so my grandfather, he was a kid, and so he was probably about 9. My grandmother was probably about 19. And he was in her yard, and she came out the door, she says, and she's like, had her broom, and like, get out of here, get out of here, get out of my yard. And he says, I'm gonna marry you, Ruby. And she said, you ain't gonna marry me, you're a little kid, get away, get away. Like, anyway, years later, she married him. So that's wow. That's her tale on that. But they actually split up and were separated, like, for a long time. And then when she found out that she could get a railroad check off her first husband, so they were really old, and she had to go to him and ask for a divorce. She's like, I got to divorce you so I get this check. So, yeah, it's crazy. But my mother used to say that my grandmother would get mad at her and say, you Fred Sexton looking thing, throw her dad up in her face. And so I don't know. I mean, that could be true. My mother said it enough times that it's probably true. I don't know, but I'm sure my grandmother never thought that it would be one of those memories that would just haunt her like that, but she, they had split up. My grandfather was not a good father as a young man. He was a better grandfather as an older man, but as a young man, he was a poker player, domino player. He was domino world champ one year, along with Bear Bryant. But gosh, I didn't realize I had this many stories. But anyway, he was not a great man. He was not a good husband. And so my grandmother and her son, my uncle, who was my mother's half brother, but he was a lot older than my mother. So, basically my grandmother and her son raised my mother, so.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So okay. So your mother and father were, so when your dad died when you were 3, what happened then?
Well, I think there must have been a little insurance money, or maybe it was a payout from the police. I don't know, but we moved from a rented home in one small town to a brand new mobile home, which, a lot of people think, a trailer, but for us, it was amazing. It had central heating and air, But we had this trailer in a trailer park, but it was a brand new trailer. And so my mother bought that trailer, so I'm thinking there was some money from somewhere because of his death, And so we lived in this trailer, in the trailer park, and my mother, we came home one day and we had a new stepfather, and she told us who he was and to call him Daddy, and so, we did. And they didn't stay together long. He was abusive to her and to us, and I don't know how long they stayed together, but they did get divorced. And then one day we came home and we had another new daddy. I guess to her credit, my mother did not date in front of us. So we didn't have men. We had men in and out, but they were married to her by the time we knew who they were. So, in a way, it was kind of a shock because you come home and now you have a new dad. But the third husband, the second stepdad, he was sexually abusive. So, and she stayed with him for a long time. So that was a pretty rough time.
Mm. Oh, now, when you say sexually abusive, was that toward her or you, the kids?
It was me. So the first time anything happened, my mother worked nights for I think she worked at the cotton mill at the time. And so, you know, I was always really afraid of my bedroom. Now I look back and it later would become very odd that I ever had my own room because there were so many of us by the time it was over in such a small place. But I had my own bedroom at the time because there were 3 rooms and my brothers shared a room. But I was always really scared of that room at night. Like it was that trailer paneling and it had the wavy patterns and you could see faces in the patterns and scary things. And then I would like run from the door and jump up on my bed so nothing would reach out and get my feet. So I feel like maybe somebody had terrorized me or something. I don't know. And then when I would go to sleep, I would cover my whole head with nothing showing but my eyes and a little bit of breathing space for my nose. So I was just really, really scared, and I was like 7. So one night, my mother was at work, and my stepdad came in there and said, "Do you want to sleep with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, you know, of course I do." And I was so happy, you know. And then when I was laying there, you know, he put his hand somewhere that it shouldn't have been, on the skin, like under the clothing. And I remember just like, I was on my belly. I remember just holding my breath, like, what in the world was happening? What do I do? So I was still as a statue. Like, I didn't move. I was just like, oh my God. And as far as I know, I must have gone to sleep eventually. And it just stayed there. Didn't do anything else. Just stayed there, right? And basically on my bottom. And then, so when my mother got home the next day, the first thing I did was tell her, you know. And I remember she said, "Did you kneel?" And then they went into the bedroom. And I know now, from what I was told years later, that they had a serious talk. And basically, she threatened him, "Don't you ever do that again, or I'll leave you," type thing. But she never came back and told me anything. Like, it was never mentioned again. So I don't know how much later it was, but I know that I was 7 the first time when that happened, and I know that I was 8 the next time. And I don't know like how close to being 8 I was. I don't know how much time passed between. I just remember the ages. And so I had seen him and my mother like horseplay before and stuff like that, and I didn't understand anything about the like flirting or anything like that. I just saw them, you know, horseplay. So one morning we were getting ready for school when I was 8, and you know, him and my brothers were wrestling, and then of course I wanted to be included, and then he picked me up over his shoulder, and I yelled something that I had heard my mother say before, and I had no idea what it meant. It seemed like something that you're supposed to say when you're playing rough, and I said, "Rape." And so he took me into the bedroom and kept me in there, and my brothers were in the other room, and he's like, "I'm going to show you what that is," and, you know, took his pants off, and then I remember my brothers coming to the door, which later, years and years later, because we never talked about it when we were young, but years and years later, they said that they knew something bad was happening, and they were trying to stop it. But they went to the door and was like, "The bus is coming, the bus is coming." And he's like, "Well, go get on it," you know, and he made them leave. And they went to school, and he did what he did. And then he made me get ready, and he took me to school. And I remember so clearly, like, sitting in my desk and just crying all day. And thinking, like, I wanted to tell somebody so bad. Like, he had threatened me not to tell, and he had told me, and this goes back to the first incident, he told me that nobody would believe me. And I was like, well, I'm going to tell him. He's like, nobody's going to believe you, just like your mom didn't believe you before. You know, you tried that already. She didn't believe you, and she told me if you ever said anything like that again, that she was going to send you off somewhere. So, but I remember sitting there, and we didn't say stepfather back then. Like, we'd been calling him dad or daddy, the way Southerners say it, for a long time. So, it was no stepdad. I mean, I didn't have a dad. That was my daddy, And so, I mean, I remember sitting there thinking, how could my own daddy do this to me, And crying, and I was like a really, really good student, and I remember taking a test, like a spelling test or something, and I remember the teacher giving it back, and it had like a really bad grade on it, and she never said a word. Like, I feel like that I was failed by that teacher, because I feel like if one person that day would have said to me, "What is wrong with you?" like, I would have told them.
You told them, yes.
But when you go through that whole day and you make it through that day, and you never, without ever saying anything, it becomes easier to make it through the next day and the next day and the next day. And so, so I didn't tell anybody, and I just look back and I'm thinking, how could that teacher have not noticed that something was wrong? Or did she just not care? Did she just not want to be bothered? Like, I don't know, but yeah, she let me go that whole day miserable and crying and didn't even say a word. And so then, and it's funny how you blame other people, you like blame this one and that one, but really there's only one person to blame. But as a teacher now, I try to pay attention to my students. Like, I'll ask them all the time, "What's wrong? Are you okay? You look like you're upset." They're like, "No, I'm not upset." I'm like, "Okay, I was just checking." But
yeah, you can. Well, so he, and that's one thing we know now about abusers, that they take advantage of the child's innocence, and they play them. They say, okay, no one's going to believe you, and whatever it takes, to get what they want, which is, if they want to do that, they're going to do that. So,
and I feel like he was right. Sometimes that's the sad part. Like, even now, like years later, I feel like, a lot of what he said about nobody believing me, like sometimes I feel that. So I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, it's, it's interesting, because I'll tell you and our listeners, when I was a teenager, my parents had divorced, and my stepfather was living with us, and my stepfather was a police detective. We had a 1-bedroom apartment, and they gave me the bedroom, and they slept on a sofa that had many sections to it, so that it was big enough for them to sleep on as a bed in the living room. So my stepfather had a son from his previous marriage, and they said, "Oh, he's coming to stay with us." Well, he was going to sleep in my bedroom with me. So they put a second bed in the room, and they didn't think anything of it. Well, a couple weeks, maybe, school started, and he had his friends at the school, and I didn't really get along with him. I just continued with my life the way it was, because here's this new person coming in. One day when my parents were away, he raped me. And I think it is their fault that they left him in the bedroom with me. Not that, anything happened, or, I had no idea he was going to do this. And so it's just interesting that, hearing your story and my own experiences with this kind of thing, it's like, if somebody is going to do it, it's so important that we get this message out there, we get this word out there to parents and caregivers, because in both our situations, nobody was there looking out for us, and it's such a shame, because, that's a position that you, especially at that young age, you never should have been in, and I know it's tough, because it takes money in this world to live, and sometimes women or, people in relationships, they do what they need to in order to get by, even being with a person who may not be the best one for them or for their family, but it's, so Wow, Sarah, I just want to give you a hug and, and just, uh, so, so, so now you also mentioned to me earlier that you became you were the oldest girl in the house and you became the whipping girl.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen until later. So the abuse from him continued, and I kept his secret because I believed what he said, And every time I would get a little braver and say, and I guess I would mess up, and because I was trying to get him to stop. Like I wasn't really gonna tell or do anything, and I was just trying to get him to stop. And I would say things like, I'm gonna tell this time, and then he would come up with some other thing to say to make me afraid to tell. And he would do things that were so like mentally cruel. Like he picked me up from his mother's house one time to take me home, and he pulled over somewhere, and then he gave me $1 and made me take it and was like, I didn't do anything against your will. I paid you. He had just crazy things like that. But when I was 10, it was still going on, and I won't even get into detail, but it got worse and worse. Like it went from that one touching incident to this, and then this, and it just kept escalating, and it got so bad. And I remember one time I told him, and by now we didn't live in the trailer anymore. We had lived in the trailer, but then we moved to another place. And during this time, he and my mom had 3 kids. And when the first one was born, I was 8, and I remember telling him, saying like, "Are you going to do this to her?" Because it was a girl. And he goes, "No, that's my daughter." And then that really kind of broke me because I thought I was his daughter, But so that was the first I knew that there was a difference. That you can say that this man is your father, but he's not. Like he doesn't see it that way, And so then later he turned around and he realized he could use her against me. And I had told him one day that I was going to tell, and he said, "Well, if you tell, like I said, nobody's going to believe you. You're going to get sent off, and then guess what? I'm going to have to do this to your sister." So of course I didn't want anything to happen to her.
Manipulation
And so and I anyway it continued on, and I had 3 sisters, but only 2 of them had been born. My mother was expecting the 3rd one. And we went to stay in the summertime for a couple of weeks at my dad's parents' house. We didn't see them on a regular basis, so in the summertime, my mother would try to take us to go spend some time with them. So, and they were very old, and they had my cousin living with them, who was also their grandchild. And so it was just him and them, and so he was very happy to have us there. He was also he was a little bit older than me, but he and my 2 brothers and I, we all went out into the cornfield, and they decided we were going to play Truth or Dare. And they had to explain to me what Truth or Dare was, and we didn't play like a sexualized, dirty version. Or at least, I guess now looking back, maybe it was, but I didn't think so. I didn't know that's what was going to happen. But we were playing Truth or Dare, and so they told me Truth or Dare, and I'm 10 years old, so I don't know why my brother asked me this, and maybe it was because he knew, because later on they did say that they, they regretted not doing anything because they suspected it, but like, what did they do, But so my brother asked me, Truth or Dare, have you ever had sex with anybody? And so I didn't really know how to answer, because it's like, well, I'm not really having sex with somebody, but they're making me. But, so I told them. I told my 2 brothers and my cousin. And so we talked about it. It became the topic of conversation. We're sitting out there in the cornfield talking about it. And so I decided during that talk, because I told them, and wow, I told somebody. So I'm like, I'm going to tell my grandparents. And my cousin said, "Don't do that." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And then he's like, "It's just going to cause so many problems." I think he had seen something like this before, because he's like, "It's just going to cause so many problems, and it's going to be bad. Don't do it." But I did. That night I went in there to them and I told them. And I look back and think, God, how did my cousin know like the problems that this was going to cause me in my life? Because it's almost like my life got worse. Because, you know, it's one thing to be like to be abused by your step parent, but what happened next, like, it's harder for me to talk about that. You know, it's crazy, I know, but like it's more of a betrayal. So my grandparents, the next morning, they got up and they took me to talk to somebody at DHR, and the person at DHR told them to take us home, and that they would have somebody come out there. So they did. They took us home, and of course they didn't want to talk to my parents about it. So they're just like, I guess they told them that we were too much trouble or something. Because I remember all these years later, my mom always said, "Yeah, I would try to send y'all to your grandparents, and they would bring y'all back because you were too much trouble." And that was the only time they had ever taken us back. And she should have known pretty quickly that that wasn't why they brought us back. Because so somebody from DHR came, and I never, ever, ever will forget because they sent me outside, and I was outside on the porch, and they were inside talking to my mother. And I remember hearing her say, "No, not my husband." And I was just like, "Your husband?" Not your husband. And I mean, at 10 years old, I knew that wasn't right. Like, the thing that she was worried about was definitely not me in that moment. And the thing is that they had separated before we went to my grandparents, and I had had a couple of weeks of freedom because it was bad. Like, it was every single chance. If no one was around, or like, he would get me up at night and with other people in the house and take me in there. And so I remember one night I said I'm not getting up. I'm gonna scream. And he's like, and I'm gonna wake everybody up. And he's like, and if you do that, because it was like my chore to wash the dishes. He's like, if you do that, I'm just gonna tell them the dishes are dirty. I'm gonna make you wash every single dish that you've already washed, and rewash all of them, and then I'm gonna do it to you anyway. So, you know, it's just gonna be worse. But anyway, yeah, so my mother was very upset about it. But anyway, what I was saying was, like, I had a couple of weeks of not dealing with that. And so while we were there at my grandparents', you know, I didn't think about this part earlier, but, you know, I told you my cousin had told me not to tell, and I was kind of trying to make up my mind. And then that night, we had a phone call with my mother, and she told my brother, and when he got off the phone, he told us, he's like, "Yeah, Mama said Neil's probably coming back." And so that was when I decided, yeah, I'm going to tell him. Because I didn't want him to come back. I wanted to keep things like they had been for that couple of weeks. But unfortunately, they didn't stay that way either.
So during that time, did your mom have a conversation with you about it, or did she?
Oh, I wouldn't call them conversations. So my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister. So she was, I mean, I can understand, like, it was the worst timing for her. Like, you know, she's got 5 kids. She's got 1 kid on the way. And now, you know, now she has to stay single. Because I say stay because they had already split up. So, but I think what would always happen was after a couple of weeks apart, she realized she couldn't handle this on her own, like financially or whatever. Not that he made much money. He worked at like McDonald's or something, but together, you know, they could do more. And so anyway, I think it was a lot on her. I know it was. And my mother had always been prone to like verbal attacks. Like, whenever she would get really, really upset, like, she would have a lot on her. Like, I can remember me and my brothers, like, cowering in the room while she just berated and screamed, and she'd go on for, like, what felt like hours. And I can remember that, but not being physically abused at that point. We'd get a whooping if we did something wrong, but yeah, once this happened, like once it came out, my mother, she would question me about what happened, but not in a loving way. Like, she was very angry, and and she didn't believe me, and she would interrogate me, like, um, well, what happened? What exactly did he do? Like, she would make me like give her like details, and she would want to know about different times, and she would make me like recount all these things, and she would hit me if I didn't tell her, but then if I told her something that she didn't like, then she would hit me for that. And um, I finally made her believe me because I told her about something that I didn't even have a name for at the time. You know, like I didn't know what it was, but I knew what happened, and I told her. And when I told her, you know, and I'm scared. I like it. It's crazy because like when I'm talking about it, like I don't mind saying the words, but then I'm like, well, I'm a teacher, and what if what if one of my students listening to this one day? So I had to be very careful. But I told her about something that happens, you know, during those kind of things, and then she knew I was telling the truth because back then we didn't have internet and we didn't watch dirty movies on TV and all that. You know, there was no way for a 10-year-old to know about that stuff, you know. And so she knew then because I remember her telling somebody later, which she didn't tell me at the time. She just hit me and got really, really angry. But later, like she was talking to the authorities or something, and I remember hearing her say that, well, she told me about this, and so I know she's telling the truth, you know. So, you know, at first she really was in disbelief for a while. And, but even once she realized that I was telling the truth, like then her thing was, why did you let it go on so long? You must have liked it. 2 years, which I think it was closer to 3, but she would say 2 years, only with a lot of cuss words. And like, how could you F my husband for 2 years?
You were a
if you
kid.
didn't
It's
like
not
it,
your
you know,
responsibility.
Huh?
No, you're a kid. It wasn't your responsibility to that just infuriates me. Sorry, I just
Well, and it's kind of hard to talk about now because I did reconcile with my mother, and we had, you know, it's like I don't want people to think that I'm bashing my mother. Even she, like, I have messages from her after we finally started talking about these things, and like even she would say she was a bad mother, like, but I know that it's hurtful to my sisters to hear these things. Like they don't want to hear it, and they will even call me a liar. They don't want to believe it, and so it's really a difficult, like, trying to have and be a part of a family that doesn't want to hear your voice. You know, we can get along for very long periods of time, but I have to do what I was trained to do by my mother at a young age, which is keep my mouth shut. You know, I wish that people could understand that talking about something because it happened doesn't mean like you're trying to hurt that person or anybody that loves them. You know, like this happened, and a lot of people in my community have no idea because you know, I did keep the secret for a long time, and you know, there are some people in our close family, like cousins and things, that have been around enough to know that because they saw things, and you know, I do have some first cousins who know what happened, and they're older, they're like my age, and my sisters are so young, like, I think that they could have forgotten some of it maybe, but I know they have to remember some too, you know. So to be called a liar, you know, when you try to talk about what happened, it's like, why would anybody make this stuff up? Nobody wants to be that person that, you know, those things happen to. So, but yeah, I had a lot of years where I was, you know, I loved my mother. Even when she was doing all of this stuff to me, like, I loved her because I was very religious. My grandmother, my granny, took me to church, and I would, when I got old enough to walk by myself, I'd walk by myself to church. We had a little church in our community, And I was very religious and Pentecostal at that. Oh my gosh. Oh, Holy Roller Church. I didn't, like, even though my family had no problem with girls wearing jeans, like, I made the decision on my own. Well, my church doesn't do that, so I'm not doing that. Like, buy me dresses, you know. Like, which I know now that's not what Christianity is about, but, you know, as a kid, I'm following the rules, you know. So being very religious, one of the big rules was honor thy father and their mother, and you had to love everybody and forgive everybody, and they would tell you forgive daily, love, you know. So like I was forgiven daily. Like, I mean, I didn't hate her. I was hurt, you know. But we had to go to like court-ordered counseling, and it was to try to get me ready to testify. And the opposite happened, because every time we had to drive to this counseling, which was in a city like 40 or 50 miles away, she would make me sit in the front beside her, and she would beat me the entire way there. And then on the way back, she would say, well, what did y'all talk about? And when I would tell her, she would hit me. So then when we would go, I stopped talking. Like, I would just sit there and not say anything. And they would sit there for an hour, and they would try to get me to talk, and I would not say a word because I didn't want her to hit me for what I said. And so then when we would leave, she said, well, what did you say? And I'd be like, I didn't say anything. And of course she didn't believe me. She's like, you don't sit there for an hour and not say nothing. I want to know what y'all talked about, you know. And she would hit me because I would tell her nothing, and she didn't believe me that wasn't true. Like, I literally did not say a word. And so then the counselors told the court people or whatever that they didn't think that I was going to be able to testify because I couldn't talk about what happened to me. And prior to the treatment that I was getting from her, I was so ready to talk about it. But she, and I don't know if it was intentional, like, I don't know if she was intentionally trying to get me not to talk about it, but that was the effect of her constantly questioning me and then hitting me no matter what I said. Nothing I said could be right. And when I say hitting me, I'm talking about, like, popping me in the face, mouth, punching, you know, like, it was vicious. And, so it got to the point where they decided to do a plea deal. So instead of 99 to life, which was the original, you know, recommendation, because he was being charged with rape 1, and the consequence was life in prison, you know, they pled it down to something that they made up. I found out later it didn't even exist, so I can't get him registered. But they pled him to sexual abuse 3rd degree, and he did 6 months in the county jail. Far less time than I did for the 3 years that he was abusing me, even if you don't count the abuse that came after that. But he pled guilty because it was a sweet deal for him, you know. During the course of this, we found out that he had abused a cousin of his growing up. You know, I wasn't the first. And, you know, I don't know that I was the last. I hope so, but I don't know. So anyway,
but your mom never got back with him, right? Your mom never reconciled it.
No, she didn't. But she would tell me that, like, because of me, you know, it was my fault because I reported what he did, that her girls couldn't have their father, you know.
Well, you know, you saved those girls because he did it to you, he would have done it to them.
You know, when I was younger, that's exactly what I thought, but they do not feel that way at all. For years, they didn't know about it, you know. I mean, well, they weren't told directly about it. I find it hard to believe they didn't hear the things that my mother was saying to me when she was screaming and beating me. But they were told much later, as far as directly told. And she told them one day, because they were like, well, you know, they were, I guess, throwing it in her face. They were arguing with her after I was grown, and she got mad one night and just told them what happened, you know. But they say they don't believe me now, so I don't know.
Well,
yeah, my mother became addicted.
we all have our own stories. We all have our own stories to tell, Sarah. And if you're telling your story, so whether they believe you or not, it's you can't let that come into your life, because whatever you've done to be resilient after all of that, being abused, being sexually abused as a child, abused by your biological mother, and then betrayed, having to live, in conditions that a child shouldn't have to go through, taking care of your siblings, cleaning, and then, everything you mentioned that you went through, trying to deal with it all. How would you say that you were able to be resilient? You said you were a good student, you were smart, you cared, you had a religious upbringing, right? You had that value of, but how would you say you got past this without, maybe turning to other things in life that some people do? They become, strippers because they want to be accepted and loved, it's just, or they go with different men and try to get back what they didn't get. There's different things that people might do. How would you say that you became so resilient? How, like, you went into the Navy when you finally could get away?
Well, I feel like I would be lying if I didn't tell you that I did some of those things.
Those are normal. Those are normal things.
Absolutely.
So keep it in mind.
Even
normal.
my mother said that. Like, she was fussing at me one time, and she's like, "They told me this was gonna happen." That people who go through that or whatever. But I went through a period of being parenticized, I think is what they call it. My mother being a single mother, I became the mother in the house, while she was gone, and was responsible for everything. Cooking, cleaning, shopping with very little money, being expected to buy a week's worth of groceries with like $12. I mean, and I could never win. But, I became responsible for a whole lot. If my sister came home and had a bad grade on her report card, I got in trouble. How could you let this happen? Why are you not helping her with her homework? That kind of thing. But inevitably, I was beaten every single night. Nothing, she would always have an excuse. Oh, you didn't scrub the doors. There's dirt on the doors. So the next night, I do everything I normally did, plus I'd scrub the doors. And then, like, from the time I got home from school until she would come home, like, at 10 o'clock at night, I would be just doing everything I could to try to keep from getting beaten. And it was never enough. And, she'd pull okay, yeah, it looks great. Let me pull the couch out. Let me look behind the couch. And so, of course, the first time that happened, I got in trouble for that. So then I started, okay, I'm going to make sure I clean behind the couch really good. And then she still would find things behind the couch. I'm like, okay, so now this time I'm going to make sure that when I see her headlights, because I know there was nothing behind the couch, and then somehow something got back behind the couch, like, before she could get home. So when I see her headlights in the yard, like when she's coming down the driveway, I'm going to look behind the couch, and I'm going to get whatever's back there. And so I look behind the couch, and nothing's back there. So I push the couch back, and she comes in, and I'm standing there, waiting for my inspection, and she's like, "Did you get behind the couch?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got behind the couch. You're not going to find anything behind the couch." And she pulls out the couch, and then when she bends over, my heart sinks, because, like, why is she bending over? And she comes out with, like, one time it was a napkin, another time it was a cup from her job, where she had several jobs, but one of them was the Waffle House, and she pulls out this Waffle House stuff, and I'm like, "Mama, I swear, I just looked." And I'm like, "When I saw your headlights, I looked right then, and there was nothing there. And I don't know how that happened." And she's like, "Are you calling me a liar?" And then, so then the beating starts, so you just can't win. And I didn't know it at the time because I was a little kid, but years later, I was remembering it. I was thinking, you know what? She wore an apron to work. And she was literally bringing smashed coffee cups and napkins in her pockets, because there was nothing behind the couch, and she was going to make sure she found something. Like, Like, she had to do what she did. She had to. Like, she would make a way for it to happen where it didn't look like she was just doing it for no reason. Because at this point, I don't know, it's like she was addicted to it. Or it was like her after work drink, you know, or whatever. But, and then I would try, like, going to bed before she came in. And, you know, if I was pretending to be asleep, I could kind of be ready. But the worst part is if I actually fell asleep, because, you know, I'd be like hoping, well, if I'm in bed, she won't bother me. It didn't work. And if I was asleep, like, the worst feeling, and it's a horrible feeling to be snatched out of bed by your hair, because you wake up and you're hurting and you're confused and you don't know what's going on for a minute. It's like the worst thing ever. But anyway, so yeah, at some point after years of this, I realized, you know, why am I doing this? Why am I doing it? Why am I running around after these people all day, cooking, cleaning, scrubbing, checking behind couches, wiping window sills? Why am I doing this? I'm going to be beaten. It's going to happen. There's nothing I can do. Nothing. So, like, she comes home and nothing's done. Nothing. Like, why bother? You know, she comes home and, you know, she would always say, I'm tired of coming home to a wreck, when she was coming home to a spotless house, right? So one night she comes home to a wreck, an absolute wreck, because my brothers were horrible. I can remember running around behind them crying and saying, y'all, please, please stop. I'm going to get beaten. Please don't make a mess. Please, it's too close to time for I don't have time to clean it up. So, you know, I stopped. I just stopped. I said, you know what? Fuck it. You know, excuse my language. I'm sorry. But I'm like, you know, why? Why bother? You know, I'm going to get beaten. So she comes home and she's like in disbelief. She's like, what in the world happened here? I'm like, your other kids? You know, I kind of became, like, I was the perfect daughter and it was never good enough. So I became that daughter that deserved that beating. I talked back. I didn't do what she asked me to do. I just get somebody pick me up and I'd leave with them. And I put myself in some very dangerous positions doing that because I didn't have any real friends. You know, I wasn't pretty. I didn't know how to act. I wasn't raised. You know, I was raising myself and my siblings. I didn't know anything about how to be friendly and have friends and be the kind of person that people wanted to be friends with. So the only people who wanted anything to do with me were the kind of people that I should not have been around, you know. So, you know, I put myself in some dangerous positions by sneaking out with people because nobody knows where you are. And they can, you know, they know that nobody knows where you are. And they do what they want to do, you know. So you end up repeating being abused because, you know, you're just trying to escape. And the people that you're escaping with are not good people. I was almost murdered one night, actually. And I went to school the next day. I snuck out, and this person took me in the woods and choked me and was on top of me, choking me. And he's like, you know, I'm going to leave you here dead tonight. Nobody's going to know where you're at. And I can just remember thinking, you know, I can remember struggling. And then, you know, and then I couldn't struggle anymore. I just stopped. I wasn't making any noise. I wasn't struggling. I mean, that was it. And it didn't hurt. It didn't even hurt anymore. And I was thinking, oh, so this is what it's going to be. You know, this is how I'm going to die. And then he stopped. And I got, you know, my breath started coming back and I started gasping. I started breathing. And then he did it again. And I was like, oh my God, he really is going to kill me, you know. And then when he stopped the second time, I was like, God, I just hope if he's going to do it, he just doesn't quit doing this back and forth thing, you know. And then he stopped and he took me home, and I didn't tell because the last time I had told that something had happened to me, I got in so much trouble. So, you know, I went home after almost being murdered, and I had marks all over my neck, and nobody knew. I mean, like, all they had to do was look. All they had to do was look, but, you know, I got up the next day.
Now, was this a friend or somebody in town or what?
This was an older man that was, I had a friend friend my age, and this was his friend that was older, which, you know, it's weird people who are older that hang out with young people, you know. This man was older and married, and like, I thought he was a friend, but he obviously wasn't. You know, choking me is not the only thing he did to me that night, but that's just what I'm able to talk about, you know.
Right.
But I went to school the next day, and I had marks all over my neck, and like even at school, like I think one girl asked me what happened, like, is that a hickey? You know, it's not a hickey. And I had a sore throat, like I could barely talk. But you know, I never told my mother about that. I just, you know, and then I had to walk to and from school because I had gotten kicked off the bus and nobody would take me. And he tried to pick me up by the road. He's like, come on, get in, I'll give you a ride. After he had done this to me, I'm like, no, you won't. I'm so proud of myself that I didn't get in that truck because I was so stupid back then. Like, it would have been something I would have done. And I wouldn't get in the truck. And he tried for a long time to get me to get in the truck. And I'm like, I'm not getting in the truck. And so he finally left me alone. But yeah, I put myself in a lot of crazy positions because of what I went through. Like, I didn't know what to do or how to act, or, you know, and it didn't stop there. Like, even after I joined the Navy, you know, I still, people would try to be my friend, and I thought I was trying to be their friend, but looking back, you know, I would always do something wrong because I didn't know any better. And most people, they think that, oh, some behaviors are so obvious you should have known better, but they don't know, like, when you're being raised in that kind of position, that you start life with a disadvantage. You really do. Like, you know, you don't have those tools that everybody else has, those coping tools. You don't feel loved. And that's the thing, like, when you don't feel loved, you are looking for love everywhere, but it's like that song, In All the Wrong Places. And it took a long time for me to grow up and get those skills that I needed to be the kind of person that I wanted to be. Like, I would be like, why can't I find love? Like, why does everybody always leave? Like, why do I end up with these kind of people? But, you know, you attract what you are, you know, and it takes time, I guess, you know.
Yeah. Now, did you go to therapy?
So, I did off and on, because of my experience with therapy when I was younger and my mother taking me and stuff. Like, it was hard for me to go again, but when I was in the Navy, I did try it, and because I was having issues where I was really depressed because I would call my sisters, and I don't know if it would be because I called them that it would start, or if she was just always fussing, but like, she would be in the background screaming at them, and I was thinking, oh, is she beating them now? Like, I was so worried about them because it was almost like they were my children, and it was very difficult for me. And when I talked to the therapist about it, he's saying, like, you have got to divorce these people. You've got to just walk away. Like, don't call, don't have anything to do with them. And I'm like, huh? Like, now I understand. But at the time, I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. Like, how do you like, this is family. Like, are you crazy? Like, you know, I didn't understand that it was okay not to talk to people who hurt you, you know? And then but another thing is, even if I didn't talk to my mother, like, that would mean that, you know, my sisters lived with her. Like, I wouldn't be able to talk to them. And my granny lived in her backyard, and I wouldn't be able to talk to my granny. And, like, I would have literally had to walk away from everything, everybody, you know? And that was something that I wasn't ready to do at that time. Like, especially with my religious background, like, you know, it would have been like a sin, you know, not that any of the other stuff I was doing wasn't, but, you know, it just didn't feel right to me, and I couldn't comprehend that. I just couldn't wrap myself around that. And the funny thing is that when I came back home, it's like the longer you're away, you start to forget the bad stuff. And I say forget, but, you know, it's just out of your mind. You're not thinking about it daily. And then I would come home for a visit or to stay or whatever, and then the mess would start, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, this is why I left. So, but while I was overseas, I actually became pregnant with my oldest child, and things were not working out with her dad, which he was a great guy. He really was. It was me, you know, and I can tell you that now. It was definitely me. Like, I did not know how to be a good girlfriend, a settled person. Like, I didn't. And so I came back here, and because my mother was like really excited about me being pregnant. She's like, oh, we're going to help you. And she had remarried this really nice man, and he was really great to her, great to us. I won't say that she was so great to him, but, you know, life, you know, whatever. So I came back, and they helped me out. You know, my mother and her husband, you know, they helped me out some, and they got me like a little trailer to put on their land so that I could live there, because I wasn't going to live with her, you know. But so that I tried living with her while I was pregnant, and then the stuff started, and I wasn't going to have my child in that. Like, once my child was born, I'm like, I'm not going to live here. And so at that point, like, I was looking for like housing projects. Like, I was going to live anywhere but there. And so they got me a trailer to put on her property so that I wouldn't go like, you're not taking my grandchild to the projects, you know. So yeah, well, let me take her to this little 50-year-old trailer then. But I think it was more about control too, though. But yeah, I can remember even after I had my daughter, and I was 22 when I had her, and I remember she was probably about a year old or so, and I was at home, and I was on the phone with my mother, and she started being ugly, and I was just like, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you when you're acting like this, and I hung up the phone. Well, in a minute, she came storming through my door, followed by my sisters, who were like still in middle school or like high school maybe by then. And she screamed at me and was like, she grabbed my phone. I was sitting in a chair holding my child. The phone was next to me. And she grabbed my phone, snatched it out of the wall, and hit me with it. And was like, you aren't going to use this phone to talk to me like that. Oh, no. And I was like, whoa. So I got up, and I started like going down the hallway. And she was following me, and she was being very threatening. And I was backing down the hallway. And I was eventually cornered into my room. And I'm like, look, you are not going to hit me with my daughter in my arms. And she just kept on talking, and I'm like, I swear to God, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. I'm going to have to. You cannot do this. You cannot put my child in danger. And eventually she hit me, and I was standing next to my bed, and I turned around, and I set my daughter down on the bed, and I punched her. Good. And she turned around, and my sisters were behind her, and this is what she did. Did you see what she did to me? And then they left, and that was the last time that she hit me.
Thank God. That's good for you. You finally stood up for yourself. And
the sad thing though is that I stood up for my daughter. That's really like, it would be nice if I would have stood up for myself, you know, but it took being a mother, you know.
Well, but that's okay. That's all right. God, you know, things happen, and everything that you went through, Sarah, you can't beat yourself up over that. It's just, to me, I'm just so amazed at your story. I told you that, right? I said you're just a pure example of resilience, and, you know, I'm just so amazed after everything that you went through. And, you know, a lot of people on my show, too, they've said, you know, well, the child saved my life. They turned me around. Having a child makes you want to live differently for them. And, you know, thank God for that, because I think we all want to be better than our parents were, and, you know, make life better for them. Yeah. And
I know it sounds corny and cliche, because people say my child saved me, but really, that is truly when I started doing everything I could to become a better person. Before she was born, I started reading the parenting magazines, trying to figure out how to do it right, like, how to handle all these situations. And I mean, like, I went from having all these different boyfriends to, I think I went for like over a year without having sex after she was born. It wasn't on my mind at all. Like, all I wanted to do was take care of her. And,
Yeah.
because I can remember the first time I was talking to a guy, I was like, God, it's been like a year. Like, I haven't even thought about this. So eventually I was ready, but at first it was just all about her. Like, I was terrified. Like, I had these horrible thoughts. Like, I was so scared that she was not going to live. Like, I was going to fail at keeping her alive, and it was a mentally drain. Like, I loved her, and like, there was a lot of wonderful, wonderful things, but it was, there was this mental, like, just being so afraid of messing up, like, I just couldn't believe, like, this baby was perfect. And I'm just like, there's no way this is mine. Like, there's no way that this is gonna, that good things don't happen to me. There is no way this is gonna work. Like, something's gonna happen. So it took a while to accept that, hey, this is real. This is happening. This is real, and you're okay.
And you're deserving of it, and the world needs you, and so it's amazing. It's amazing.
So, yeah, I got a grant, and I went to school. My mother had told me, that I never had the chance to even take the SAT in high school. Like, my mother told me, oh, no, rich kids go to college. You're not rich. You're going in the military. So I did, but eventually afterwards, when I had my daughter, I got a grant, and I went to school to be a hairdresser. And the crazy thing is, I didn't even know anything about doing my own hair. Like, I had no real desire to be a hairdresser. I had always wanted to be a teacher, but at the time, I was just like, I need to make money fast. I need to get out of the situation I'm in. What can I do that I can make money at that I don't have to go to school for a long time? So hairdresser, you only had to go for a year. So that was kind of how I made up my mind. And there was a community college or a technical college close enough that I could go. And so that's what I did. I got on, like, I worked at a convenience store. I got food stamps. I got a grant, and I went to college. And I started doing hair. And I did hair for like 20 years. And I never really made a great living at it. Believe it or not, I'm not very good at talking to people. I mean, I can remember somebody saying that, like, that was the driest haircut they ever had. I didn't know what to say to them. I'm just cutting their hair. I did great haircuts, but I wasn't very entertaining. I wasn't like Steel Magnolias for sure. But, it did okay. But eventually I went back to waitressing because I could make more money waiting tables than doing what I went to college to do. And so, and then fast forward a little bit more, and I saw I was at the VA, and I saw a flyer on that said that they were sending people to college, and I'm like, maybe that's, I had been diagnosed with PTSD from my childhood trauma, and I had one assault while I was in the military. And so I was receiving services from the VA because of the PTSD, because a portion of it they attributed to childhood trauma, which kind of made me wish I had never told them about it. And then another portion they attributed to the trauma. They call it MST, military sexual trauma. So because a portion of it was attributed to the military trauma, I was getting services at the VA hospital, and I saw a thing, because I was too stupid to get the GI Bill. When you join the military, they offer you the GI Bill, but it's a one-time deal. You either take it or you don't, and that's it. You don't get another chance. And they try to tell you, they're like, you need to take it, because if you don't use it, you've only put a little bit of money into it. But if you want to use it and you didn't get it, but I'm like, well, my mom said I'm never going to college, and like, I'm in the military. What do I need college for? This is it. This is what you do. You give me an education, right? So I did not get the GI Bill. So when I saw that there was this other program, I was like, oh wow. So I looked into it, and I was accepted, and so they're going to send me to college for 4 years. And I'm like, yeah, I want to be a teacher. And so after I had gone for a couple of semesters and was getting 4.0s, my counselor is what they call it, from this program, called me up and he says, you're going to get a master's degree. So before I had ever received my bachelor's degree, I was told that I was going to go through to the master's degree. And I'm like, well, I kind of wish because it was a 4-year program, there was no option to do more than that. You had to choose something that was 4 years. And I'm like, well, I kind of wish that, you guys would have told me that you were going to throw this option at me because, maybe I wouldn't have gone for education. And I wanted to be a teacher, but I also want to be wealthy. So, if I'd have known I was going to go to college long enough to be a lawyer or something, then I would have been a lawyer or something. But, so yeah, I went and I got my bachelor's and then my master's, and I was starting to work on my specialist degree, and then I kind of got tired of going to school. It's a lot. And now I'm back in school after several years out because I'm going for leadership, like to be a principal. So we'll see how that works out. Hopefully, well.
Good. So Sarah, you basically shared your life story, and I just want to recap for our listeners, anybody who's going to be joining in late. Sarah is our guest today. She's an author. She has her bachelor's and her master's. She's a veteran of the Navy. And she escaped abuse. She's a survivor of childhood abuse, both domestic violence and sexual abuse. And, what she went through, betrayed by her family, it's something that we are hoping you can listen to and learn from, and just know that what Sarah did, that she was able to get through this resiliently. She was able to accept help when it was offered. She was able to ask for help. She was honest. She told the truth when she was ready. And, one of the things that I talk about in my book, Emotional Strength Explained, I mention this book in every radio show. It's a self-help workbook, and in here, it's real easy. You learn about what it takes to become stronger. You have a place to write things down. You define what health is. You talk about what support means to you. And then, you talk about the way that you've been judged, the way that you've been treated, and you redefine what that health means to you. You move forward if you're brave enough to face yourself and decide. And you can then live an open and inspired life despite whatever trauma that you went through. So my book, Emotional Strength Explained, is a wonderful way if anybody is thinking about what they've been through and they're ready to face it, ready to deal with it, to live a better life. They can get acceptance and self-confidence. Sarah, it's so inspiring to hear everything. I mean, I personally can't wait to read your book now. I'm going to go and buy that online. We've talked, it doesn't seem like it, but we've been on for over an hour. So you had a dream come true that you were able to become a teacher, and now you're even going beyond that. You're looking to go back to school and become a principal. Is there anything else? Oh, I love this. One of the things you wrote back when I wrote the questions to you for the interview, what is one small win you have each day that enriches your sense of being? And you say, every day is a win for me now. I'm happy, I'm loved, I'm safe. And that is something that I really want to put forward to our listeners, that, if you're seeing somebody in your life that is having a change, maybe the kid in the grades are dropping, maybe they're not acting the same, maybe they're pulling back, maybe they're acting out. Take a minute and ask, keep the communication open, because you never know what that person has experienced or what they're going through. So Sarah, I I would love to end it on that note. I'm so happy that you are in a good place right now. You're so deserving of it. And is there anything else, Sarah, that you want to share with our listeners?
I just feel like I need to add that my mother recently passed away, and you know, I was, we are and were in each other's lives. Like I never completely walked away from my mother. There was a year that we were no contact while we worked on some things, and I told her that we were going to not have any communication until she was ready to forgive herself, because I felt like that, I had forgiven her, but things she would keep saying, like, well, you always this and you always that. Like she would blame everything that happened in the present on the past instead of dealing with it as if it were a present issue. And so she had a lot of guilt about what she knew what she did, and she had a lot of guilt about it, but she wouldn't talk about it. And so I told her, until you're ready, to talk about this and bury it, then, we can't keep doing this. So about a year went by, and she called, and I think she messaged first, and she had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and so she wanted to get back in my life, and she said that, it wasn't the best apology in the world, but it was a lot for her, after so many years. And she basically said, she didn't know any better. Her raising had something to do with it. And, I didn't 100% believe what she said, because, when it's one child, you can't blame it on your raising. If it's everybody, yeah. But, you don't, I don't think you target one person because of the way you were raised. So I didn't 100% buy into everything, but I applauded the effort, and I made the decision that, because of her circumstances, that I was going to accept that and move on. And so, and her behavior changed a great deal when she knew she was sick. Like, I felt like she put a lot of effort into trying to be a better person herself. And I mean, every now and then you could see the old her kind of like peek its head out sometimes, but she really did change, and you could see that effort. And by the time she passed away, I felt like she had definitely grown to depend on me. And I mean, my sisters did a lot for her, and I know they did more for her than I did. My job and different things come into play, and their proximity to her was closer. So I know they did a lot more for her than I did. But at the very end, like, she wouldn't let anybody but me go pay her bills and take care of her money. And like, she would make them, they were like, Mama, we could do it. She's at work. Everything's going to be closed when she gets home. And she's like, no, we will wait for her. And so, it really meant a lot to me, like that we had really developed that better relationship, even though it still wasn't perfect. I don't think any relationship is perfect. And she recently passed away last month, and when, like, I had been wanting to say something, but I'm like, she's sick, like, I don't want to upset her, I don't want to bother her, And so finally, when she could hardly talk anymore, I got a moment alone with her, and I say a moment because, of course, everybody had come in, and we were all trying to be there with her. And I just leaned over and I said, I don't know if you can hear me, and I don't know if you know who I am, but I forgive you. And I think that she knew, because she kind of raised her head up a little bit, like she was trying to say something, and made a face. And I really feel like she was trying to say, yeah, I know who you are, and I understand. And, I know my sisters think, because it's something that my sister recently said to me, like, basically told me I had always hated my mother. And I know that's what they think. But all I ever wanted was a good relationship with her, and for her to love me. And I think that she probably did in some way, and was just sick,
Yeah.
But anyway, I wasn't trying to end on a bad note, but I just wanted to say that, because I don't, should anybody in my family or community come across this, I don't want anybody to think I hated my mother, I kept her secret for a very long time because to protect her, like I wouldn't say anything because I felt like I needed to talk, but at the same time, I didn't want to hurt her. She had a very good reputation in our community. People loved her. They thought, oh, this single mother with 6 kids and she's doing so good, and look at her and she's going through all this. So of course, I didn't want to be the one to mess that up. But sometimes we do need to talk about the things that have happened to us, and it doesn't mean that we hate the person that we're talking about. It just means that it happened.
Yeah, and you were a good daughter to her, and you protected her, and you tried to manage it all on your shoulders, and being the older of your siblings and stuff, it's like they can never understand where you're coming from, and you've heard it before. Unless you walk in somebody else's shoes, you shouldn't try and figure, what they're doing or what they should do, because they could never know. And Sarah, I give you so much credit for how you handled everything, and in the end, that you have that peace with your mother now. You were able to speak, the words to her that, you forgave her. It's really amazing, and it's, life is messy. We're living the human condition, and, as much as everybody tries to put on, the face that they're a good person or they are doing the right thing, it's important that you do set those boundaries, so try not to, wait for the approval of certain people in your life. You're doing the right thing, just like you set that boundary that your mother wasn't going to hit you when you came to that point. You were ready, and you need to do that same thing and be strong, because you are worthy. You're an amazing person, and you're very deserving of that peace, that you did everything the right way. And so, again, just try to know that you may not win their respect, you may not get them to agree with you and give you that encouragement, but stay with that support system that you have, right? You have a good husband right now. There's a lot of resources out there, because you are a survivor. In fact, I'm going to give you a couple resources that I have too, in case you want to connect or get some other support. We've got to be there for each other as survivors, and deep inside, and maybe not so deep, we're still that child. We're still that hurt little kid who didn't get to be a kid. And so take time every day to be in touch with her and do kind things for yourself, because you deserve it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, Sarah, again, I want to thank you for being on the show. I'm looking forward to having you on again when you have your next book or your next project. Glad to have you on again. And